The United States went through an amazing transformation in the late 1800s. By 1880, the United States had surpassed Great Britain in becoming the world's leading producer of goods. The question is key about how exactly were we able to accomplish this? And the answer is that it's not just one factor. There are many factors that led to this. First was an unlimited labor force. We had unlimited immigration at this time period, which allowed mass amounts of people into the United States. And just like today, we often associate immigrants with working for less money. This was the case here too, especially during a time period when we had no minimum wage and very few labor laws. We had an abundant coal supply. This was used for fuel that could then power both our railroads and our industry. Iron mining, which was going to be used for making steel, and in a lot of cases that steel was used through the railroads and then later for other buildings like skyscrapers. We also had the discovery of oil in the United States. The discovery of oil in the United States was going to be assisted by Edwin Drake and his ability to dig deeper or drill deeper for that oil. This was used both for fuel and for kerosene for lamps. During this time period, the entire nation basically used kerosene lamps in order to see at night. We also had a tremendous amount of railroad development, which once again is going to allow for much faster transportation of both people and goods. Our government at the time was very laissez-faire or hands-off. This is something really important that you need to remember. This basically means that we had almost no government regulation of industry. Like I said before, we had no labor laws, we had no minimum wage, we had no protection for our laborers. We also had that unlimited immigration that is going to provide this industry with a tremendous amount of cheap labor. We also had high tariffs. A tariff is a tax on imports. Hopefully you remember this from your previous study of American history. This is going to protect American businesses from foreign competition, so it makes the American-made goods cheaper to buy for the consumer. Remember, a tariff is a tax on imports. We also had public financing of railroads. This basically means that the government was helping to pay for the expansion of those railroads. We had lots of innovations in the late 1800s. We're going to go over them briefly, and you're going to look into a few of them a little more closely. For example, the telephone, which was Alexander Graham Bell. The light bulb, which was perfected by Thomas Edison. He goes through many different trials until he gets just the right filament to make a light. Electric power by Nikola Tesla. He's going to introduce alternating current power, which was a safer type of power that is going to replace kerosene lamps eventually. The Bessemer process, this was big. This is going to create a process that's going to change iron into steel. While iron is an important metal, it could have a tendency to be a little on the brittle side. Still, steel was much more durable and much stronger. The typewriter, which is going to once again, along with the telephone, allow for that faster office communication. Photography is going to be more accessible for average Americans. Basically, there was a camera invented where your average American could take a picture, send the entire camera with film still in it back to the company where they would then develop the film and then put new film in the camera and send the pictures and camera back to the consumer. The phonograph, which was another Thomas Edison, this is him on the left here that you see, along with motion pictures, again, Thomas Edison. He had so many inventions at his laboratory called Menlo Park. The radio, again, connecting the nation. This is tremendously important for a country the size of the United States. Retail stores where your consumers could go in and purchase almost any type of product they needed, along with canned foods that is going to provide long-term food storage instead of having to just salt your meats or can your vegetables in a different way. These types of canned foods are going to allow Americans to save food for a longer period of time. We also had these great men who were going to be leaders of various industries. John D. Rockefeller was the leader of Standard Oil and the oil industry. Andrew Carnegie, who was going to be the leader of the steel industry. J.P. Morgan, the leader of finance and banking. He had his hand in both of those things, very wealthy individual. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was the leader of the railroad industry. All of these four men in particular were some of the most wealthy men, not only of the 1800s and 1900s, but of all time. The DuPont family, which you have seen them before, you've seen that name, James B. Duke, as in Duke University, and George Westinghouse. All of these people, all of these men were leaders of great industry and had a tremendous amount of wealth, who they gained their great wealth because of the perfect storm of factors in the late 1800s in the United States. Railroads were nicknamed the Iron Horse because of their very fast transportation. They were the leading consumer of goods, especially steel, for obvious reasons. And remember, when you have better transportation, it's going to lead to growth. It's going to allow Americans to get to their place much faster. And the Transcontinental Railroad, which was completed in 1869, connecting the East and West Coast, is going to again make that transportation much more reliable and faster. It eventually also leads to the standardization of time. Remember, before this, time is going to be based on the position of the sun in the sky. But across the United States, and because of the way the Earth rotates, it is going to be in different places. And the railroad, since scheduling is so important to them, is going to be key for them to come up with some type of standard. This is going to lead to the creation of time zones, like you see here on this map. The railroads were going to be really important in the growth of our urban areas. With the introduction of the railroad, it made it easier for Americans to live further outside the center of cities. This is going to actually lead to the growth of those urban areas because instead of it all being centered in one area, it can now begin to spread a little bit. We see the development of company towns that were introduced by railroad companies. This is going to be a town that was created by a company for its people or workers. So not only would the workers work at the factory of this company, their house that they lived in or their apartment that they lived in was going to be owned by that company. Most of the stores in town were owned by that company. So this was going to be a way that the company could also control the prices and get more income from its workers, make more money. Pullman, Illinois, which was a railroad sleeping car. Think of a sleeping car kind of like just a railroad car with beds in it so that people could sleep on their long train rides. But Pullman, Illinois was a company created by a railroad company specifically for its workers. Railroads, like we've already discussed, were really involved in a lot of scandals. The Credit Mobilier scandal was going to be a scandal involving some accepting of bribes and using government lands, and as well as this government land grants. Basically, they were frauding the government and taking bribes or giving bribes to government officials to get access to land that they shouldn't have had access to. Remember, we talked about all of those railroad abuses that the farmers had. Their railroads were charging too high prices, weren't giving rebates to small customers. So they're going to create these Granger laws that were actually successful in regulating the railroads. But remember, because railroads are going to cross state lines, that is federal government jurisdiction. So in the Supreme Court case Wabash versus Illinois, they're going to overturn those Granger laws and instead replace it with the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887 that attempted to regulate this business. Specifically, they were attempting to try to regulate the railroads. So we see here that the government was attempting to make some type of change to all of the railroad abuses.